Hello, welcome to Alpengeist Fan 08. Today, I'll be counting down my top 25 coasters I've ridden. I'm making this video because I just recently hit 100 subscribers. Thank you guys so much. I'm hoping to grow more and more. I'd like to give one shout out to Mr. Roller Coasters for helping me get to 100 subscribers. Now, let's get into the list. Let's start off this list with Hershey Park's 74-year-old PTC wooden coaster, COMET. This vintage Woody is quite fun. It has some decent airtime due to the buzz bars. Overall, this is a fun wooden coaster, and it is my number 4 at Hershey Park. This coaster won't have you screaming like the park's other attractions, but it's still a fun vintage Woody that everyone will enjoy. It's also pretty smooth for its age. At the number 24 spot, we have another wooden coaster at Hershey Park, Lightning Racer. This is the park's dueling GCI wooden coaster. It is my favorite dueling coaster that I've ridden. It has some decent airtime and is smooth. This coaster just barely beats out COMET because of the dueling aspect. Overall, this is a fun wooden coaster that I recommend you check out. Now we have a very controversial pick, VORTEX at Kings Island. VORTEX is the only defunct coaster I've ridden. This coaster gets a lot of hate. Even I was expecting to hate this coaster. I was shocked when this ride became my 4th favorite coaster at the park. It wasn't too rough, and it had insane hang time. This coaster has my favorite hang time of any coaster I've ridden. This is my 2nd favorite aerodynamics custom looping coaster I've ridden. I'm very sad this coaster was removed at the end of the 2019 season. I'm very glad I was able to ride this coaster. Rest in peace, VORTEX. Let's have a moment of silence. Moving on, we have another semi-controversial pick, Blue Streak at Cedar Point. This 55-year-old PTC wooden coaster is actually very fun. It is surprisingly my 6th favorite coaster at Cedar Point. It is a little rough, but it's a good form of rough in my opinion. It has some decent airtime and laterals. This is a coaster that everyone will like besides those who are way too sensitive about the roughness. Next up, we have another aerodynamics looping coaster, Loch Ness Monster at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. This is my 4th favorite coaster at the park. While VORTEX brought the hang time, Loch Ness Monster brought the airtime. This ride has 3 good airtime moments. I'm surprised by how much airtime you get in the back. Also, this is my first coaster I ever rode. Without this coaster, I likely would never be an enthusiast. At the number 20 spot, we have the oldest coaster on this list, Jackrabbit at Kennywood. This ride is very fun and smooth for a coaster built 100 years ago. Yeah, you heard that right. This is one of the oldest coasters in the US. This John A. Miller wooden coaster is relatively mild, so why is it on my list? 2 words. Double dip. Or double down, as some people will call it, even though it isn't really a double down. It is my 4th favorite airtime moment I've experienced. This ride barely has any restraint, so you get launched out of your seat. It was very shocking. So yeah, Jackrabbit is a coaster everyone in the family will enjoy. At the number 19 spot, we have another coaster at Kennywood, Steel Curtain. This massive 212-foot S&S Worldwide custom looper is a really interesting ride. I will say that I consider this ride overrated. I don't think it's as good as most people say it is. Even though it is overrated, it's still a good ride. It's smooth, fairly intense, and has some decent airtime. At the number 18 spot, we have another overrated coaster, Diamondback at Kings Island. This B&M Hypercoaster is one of 2 B&M Hypers I've ridden. This is the weaker of the 2 I've ridden. I will say that I like the floater airtime and it has a cool splashdown at the end. If you like floater airtime, you'll probably love this coaster. For now, it's my number 2 B&M Hyper, and maybe my number 3 if I actually ride Nitro at Six Flags Great Adventure this year. Man, what is it with all these overrated coasters in a row? Yeah, you heard that right. Kings Island's GCI wooden coaster, Mystic Timbers, is pretty overrated. It's still my 4th favorite wooden coaster I've ridden, but it is overrated. It's a decently short ride. It does have good airtime, but it doesn't live up to Kings Island's other massive wooden coaster that we will get to soon. Hey, we have another coaster at my home park. GRIFFON at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg is one of 2 dive coasters I've ridden, the other one being Valorraven at Cedar Point. Let me just say, this is far, far, far better than Valorraven. I've done a full review on Valorraven. If you haven't seen that video, go watch it after this one. Anyways, GRIFFON fixes all of the issues I had with Valorraven. It has one of my favorite drops I've ever experienced, and it has some good airtime. Plus, the ride is very smooth. It also has way better restraints than Valorraven. Overall, if you don't like Valorraven like me, at least try this B&M dive coaster out. It fixes everything wrong with Valorraven. Look! Another coaster at my home park, and another B&M. This one being Apollo's Chariot, which is Busch Gardens Williamsburg's B&M hypercoaster. This was B&M's first hypercoaster, and it is better than Diamondback in my opinion. The main reason why I prefer this to Diamondback is because it has stronger airtime. Diamondback has all floater, and Apollo's Chariot has floater and flowjector. This ride has better airtime than Diamondback due to the fact that I prefer flowjector to floater. Overall, this is a fun coaster and is my third favorite B&M I've ridden. At the number 14 spot, we have my favorite coaster at Kings Island, the Beast. This 41-year-old Din Corporation wooden coaster gets a decent amount of hate. Let me just say, it doesn't deserve it. I consider this coaster highly underrated. The night ride is truly magical, and the double helix at the end has amazing laterals. I love this coaster and is currently my third favorite wooden coaster I've ridden. Much like Blue Streak, it has a lovable vintage roughness. Overall, if you like rough wooden coasters, you will probably like this coaster. I'm not even the biggest fan of rough wooden coasters, but I certainly love this coaster. Next up, we have another wooden coaster, the Legend at Holiday World. This CCI wooden coaster is very smooth and has great laterals. It is definitely the smoothest of the three wooden coasters at Holiday World. I also love this ride's location. Overall, the Legend is a highly underrated coaster that I highly recommend if you love lateral-filled woodies. Next up, we have another underrated coaster. This one being Cedar Point's B&M Invert Raptor. This is my second B&M Invert and my second favorite B&M coaster. It is very intense and quite smooth other than the final transition. It is a very good coaster and is highly underlooked at the park. It is my number 5 coaster at Cedar Point. Now we have another Cedar Point coaster. This one being their Aerodynamics Hypercoaster, Magnum XL 200. This coaster is also a little bit underrated. This was the first coaster over 200 feet. This is one of the most important coasters out there. I really hope Cedar Point doesn't remove this coaster anytime soon. It has good airtime and is decently intense. It also has a vintage roughness that you usually find on old wooden coasters. It's interesting that this coaster has a wooden coaster style roughness while being a steel coaster. This ride is quite painful, however. This may sound weird, but it's a good kind of painful. Overall, this coaster I would call underrated, especially for Cedar Point standards. Next up, we have the first ever Strata coaster, Top Thrill Dragster at Cedar Point. This 420-foot-tall launched Intamin Strata coaster is easily one of the most famous coasters at the park. While I would call it a little overrated, it is still a great ride and just barely makes my top 10. This ride is extremely short. It is only 17 seconds long. However, this ride has what is easily my favorite launch I've ever experienced. It also has a good top hat. This ride is also glossy smooth. So yeah, Top Thrill Dragster is a great coaster, but it is a little overrated. Next up, we have another Intamin launch coaster, this one being Storm Runner at Hershey Park. This is my number 2 coaster at Hershey Park and my number 2 launch coaster. The only reason why I slightly prefer this over Top Thrill Dragster is the fact that it's longer and it has more elements. I do prefer Top Thrill Dragster's launch, but other than that, I prefer Storm Runner. The launch is my third favorite launch I've experienced. The Flying Snake Dive is very fun. Overall, this is an underrated launch coaster that I highly recommend you ride if you like launch coasters. Next up, we have the most overrated coaster I've ridden, the Voyage at Holiday World. This Gravity Group wooden coaster is usually considered a top 10 coaster in the world. I strongly disagree. I'm going to make a coaster review on this coaster soon, and I will go more in depth there. So yeah, I won't talk about this coaster too much. Let me just say, I was surprised by how rough it is, and by how weak the airtime is. Let me save everything else for the review. Next up, we have the only coaster on this list that I've actually reviewed. I won't talk about this coaster too much just because I've already done an in-depth review on it. Please watch that review if you haven't already. Let me just say, this channel wouldn't be here without this absolutely amazing, underrated B&M invert. Just barely missing the top 5, we have Kentucky Kingdom's Chance Morgan Hyper GTX coaster, Lightning Run. This coaster has a great drop, great ejector airtime, and is pretty intense. I do really want more of these Chance Hyper GTXs to be built. They provide a great ride while not taking up too much space. Now we are getting into my top 5, starting off with Maverick. my favorite launch coaster I've experienced. This Intamin launch coaster is my favorite coaster under 100 feet tall. It also has my second favorite launch I've experienced. It has 2 good airtime moments and is pretty intense. Overall, this coaster just barely makes my top 5 and is my number 2 coaster at Cedar Point. At my number 4 spot, we have one of 2 RMC coasters I've ridden. This one being Storm Chaser at Kentucky Kingdom. This ride has some very powerful airtime and is pretty intense. I love the airtime on this coaster. The drop is also very fun. The trick track double up is very fun and provides great airtime. Overall, I'd call this coaster a bit underrated. If you like sharp ejector like me, you'll love this coaster. Now, we have a coaster that will likely cause a lot of controversy. Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point. This coaster was the first RMC Hyper Hybrid coaster. I will do a full review on this coaster soon. Let me just say that this coaster is overrated. It has mostly flow ejector besides one moment of sharp ejector. I'm going to stop talking about this coaster now just because I'll be doing a full review on it. But yeah, this is not my number 1 coaster. At the number 2 spot, we have my favorite Intamin coaster, SKYRUSH at Hershey Park. This Intamin hypercoaster is my favorite coaster at Hershey Park and my second favorite coaster overall. This ride is very intense and it has great airtime. This ride is always criticized for its restraints. Let me just say, stop overreacting. They aren't that bad. But yeah, this coaster is amazing, but still gets beat out by Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood. This will cause a lot of controversy. I'm planning on making this coaster my next review. I will go much more in depth in that review. I will just say that this coaster has my favorite airtime of any coaster I've ridden and is quite intense. Plus, it has amazing restraints. I won't talk about this coaster anymore due to the fact that I want to save my praise for the actual review. And there you have it, my top 25 roller coasters that I've ridden. Tell me what you think. For now, Alpengeist Fan 08, out.